All right. I hope you guys are doing well. Today we're going to move on and we're going to talk about the Spanish influenza, what the outbreak, the pandemic that started right at the end of World War One, and maybe compare it to today with the coronavirus. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I also have a video for it. Please check it out. It's really interesting and how they compare the Spanish flu to the coronavirus today, and I think you'll enjoy it. Again, your Treaty of Versailles reading, okay, that is due today, so I'll have those grades in by today, and make sure you have those turned in. Um, if you turn it in late, you'll lose a little bit of points, but not too much. Just try to get it done. Okay, it's important to know that information. And I got a bell ringer for you, and we'll talk about the Spanish flu, some of the impacts of the war in the United States, okay, and even in Germany, which will later we'll see be a cause to World War II. All right, so real quick, let's go over here this real quick with the bell ringer. There we go. Yep. All right, so describe what the Treaty of Versailles placed on Germany after the Great War. All right, so I'll give you a few seconds. If you want to pause the video so you can work on this, and I'll discuss it. Okay, so describe what the Treaty of Versailles placed on Germany after the Great War. We know that this treaty was established to try to prevent future warfare. Okay, and we'll talk about Wilson's 14 points and League of Nations towards the end of this response here. I have a political cartoon to explain. Treaty of Versailles was placing the sole blame of the war on Germany. Okay, even though they didn't start the war, right? Even though that Austria-Hungary with Franz Ferdinand being assassinated, that's what really started this war. But Germany was placed with the sole blame because of how strong of a military they were, because of how brutal they were on the battlefield with chemical warfare. And a lot of it, I think, is just because Great Britain and France, the two main players in Europe, the two strongest powers for hundreds of years, thought, you know what, we can't allow Germany to become a strong power again, a dominant power, because in World War One they were more advanced. They had more, they had a more advanced military, even naval power. They're hard to compete against, right? So I think with Great Britain, especially with the Royal Navy, they thought, well, in order to try to prevent them from ever having a naval arms race with them again, we're going to try to strip them of what really provides a national pride to their people, and what really pushes them as this dominant world power. Same with France. Okay, we'll talk about the military restrictions as well, of how that was devastating towards them. And in a way, this was really trying to stick it to Germany, rub their nose in the dirt for trying to really compete against these two world powers, and it tried to show their dominance in Europe. In many ways, I think this Treaty of Versailles was really just to try to punish Germany. Okay, make sure that they could never rise to power again. And I think is more because these two powers, specifically France and Great Britain, viewed Germany as a threat. They knew that no longer were they the most dominant power in the world and in Europe. Okay, so they needed to try to do something to try to prevent them from rising as a world power. So number one, make sure you remember this. These five, the list that I put up on the board yesterday. The sole blame of the war was placed on Germany. Okay, they wanted to make sure that everybody looking towards this war and knew of it, okay, in future years will know that Germany was aggressive and that they were trying to seek destruction in their acts. All right, number two, they lost borderlands. Okay, we talked about the Franco-Prussian War and how Alsace-Lorraine was taken from France, and how Germany was trying to expand, okay, trying to become a stronger power in Europe and show their nationalistic pride, right? So Alsace-Lorraine was taken away from Germany, given to France, and parts of the eastern side of Germany was taken away as well. And we'll talk about how Poland was formed at the end of World War One, and many other countries were formed in Europe after the war, which was territorial losses, borderlands taken away from Germany. And this was to try to take away national pride, right? If they don't have resources, these industrial centers, how are they going to try to become a stronger power, a world power? They can't. If they don't have the factories, the production, there's no way that they could promote and build a strong military. Okay, if they don't have the factories and the resources, the raw materials, they'll never become a strong power. And that leads to the next one, loss of territorial gains, right? So all the overseas territories that they had were all stripped from them. So in Africa, parts of Asia, right? A lot of these territories were taken away to try to limit any type of resources, raw materials coming into Germany to help fuel them and become a stronger power. Again, if you cut off the industries, the factories, the raw materials, resources, how will they become a strong power again? They won't. Number four, all right, so restriction of military. So Germany, especially with Prussia, right, how Prussia unified Germany as a whole, once Germany became this military power, a lot of their people, a lot of their citizens had a lot of national pride in their military. They saw what Germany became. And the only way they became unified was because of the military. And all these advancements, the second wave of the Industrial Revolution, which we talked about and discussed, all formed with with Germany, right? Okay, so if you take that away from them, there's no national pride. Many of the people in Germany won't have any type of inspiration or motivation. Okay, you're stripping of something that really was, their pride and joy. Okay, so military restrictions, they're limited to around 100,000 soldiers in their military, and it's only for defensive purposes. They want to, again, France especially and Great Britain wanted to make sure that they could no longer have a strong land army. For many years, they had the strongest land army, most advanced land army in the world. And if you take that away from them, okay, there's going to be no national pride. And then loss of navy. Great Britain wanted to make sure that their Royal Navy would never be challenged again, okay, at a world stage. So in order to try to prevent them from having another naval arms race, and because Great Britain was bitter from the first one, they wanted to make sure that they could no longer have a navy. And then finally, the reparations, okay, billions of dollars that Germany would have to pay France, Great Britain, okay, rest of Europe to try to rebuild because of the destruction of World War One. And it's going to be hard to do, right? Let's face it. If they have no industries, no factories, no resources coming in, how can they make finalized goods? How can they become a stronger power and make money in order to try to trade with other countries? They can't. So, in a way, France and Great Britain tried to really put the blame, all the reparations, all the fines, all the restrictions on Germany when they know without any factories, without borderlands, territories, how are they going to build in order to try to pay back these reparations? It just won't happen. It won't happen. And you can just see how the Allied powers, specifically Great Britain and France, wanted to really push the pressure on Germany and make sure that they could never become a strong power again with this Treaty of Versailles. And that's why many people view this Treaty of Versailles the worst thing that could ever happen at the end of World War One. Okay, because it was really trying to push Germany lower than dirt. So these reparations, like I mentioned yesterday, the only reason I know of it is because there was a foreign exchange student in college, in one of my college classes, that spoke up when we were talking about the Treaty of Versailles, and he said in 2010, okay, they finally paid off the last, I guess you could say, reparations from World War One. So 1918 is when the war ended. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. Okay, all the way to 2010, they finally paid off that war debt, which is amazing. It's crazy how long that took. Right? When we get to World War II, we know Hitler, he didn't pay anything towards this treaty, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But maybe that's why it lasted a little bit longer. And because they have no territories, no factories, no industries, how are they supposed to? They have no military. How can they protect themselves? So this treaty, not so great for them. All right, moving on. Real quick, this is a political cartoon. I was going to have you do it, but I'm going to be nice, and we're just going to discuss it right now. So I'll let you look at this political cartoon for a couple of seconds. If you want to, please pause it, analyze it, look over it, okay? And I'm going to go over this real quick. I'm going to take a drink of my water. Like I said, if you want to, pause it. All right, so with this political cartoon, all right, so it's under construction. We know this bridge is under construction, and as a way to try to form peace, right? The League of Nations was this establishment, okay, of these countries, diplomats from each country to try to solve disputes and solve conflicts before we would see another war. As you can see, I know it's hard to read, but it says League of Nations Bridge. Okay, President of the United States came up with the idea. It's under construction. So you see Belgium, France, England, Italy, okay, all these countries in Europe coming together to form this bridge. And the centerpiece, which is the most significant piece, the keystone, if you will, is the United States. As we know, the United States is missing from this bridge. Okay, and this shows that Congress voted against the United States joining the League of Nations because they wanted to try to stay out of world European affairs. Okay, after this war, that's it. No more. The United States is across the Atlantic Ocean. There's no need for the U.S. to get involved. And many argue that because the United States not joining this League of Nations, this establishment of all the countries specifically in Europe, to dispute and talk about certain issues. Okay, if they would have joined the United States, they could have maybe been the mediator and solved some of these issues before another war would arise. Okay, and even with this Treaty of Versailles, right? Obviously, German people are going to be very angry over it. And soon enough, we might see someone rise to power and push for another world war. So, this political cartoon, we see Uncle Sam sitting over here. The United States, the keystone, the centerpiece, is missing because the U.S. did not join the League of Nations, although Woodrow Wilson came up with the idea. All right, this is the predecessor to the United Nations, established and set up after World War II, which is still intact today. All right, I wanted to go over that with you just because I thought that was very interesting. And it's a pretty good political cartoon explaining what was going on during that time. All right, real quick. Yep. All right. So we talked about the 14 points. We talked about the League of Nations, the Treaty of Versailles. So make sure you remember that Treaty of Versailles and how that was influential, how that was significant, and how the Allied powers, specifically France and Great Britain, were trying to enforce this treaty onto Germany and make sure that they could never become a strong power ever again. And the League of Nations, that's the biggest point of Wilson's 14 points. Yeah, I know there's 13 other ones, but the main one was the League of Nations, and that was a failure in a way. So, that's the big takeaways from yesterday. All right, so one of the biggest issues, which is really relevant to today, is in September 1918, the influenza spreads. The Spanish flu is what they call it. It's because it originated out of Spain, right? The Spanish flu was one of the reasons why we actually see more total deaths of Americans because of World War I. Actually, more people died because of the Spanish flu, this influenza virus, than actual Americans died in World War I. All right, so with the Spanish flu, it was, I guess you could say it's very relatable today with coronavirus. In many cases, many people say that the Spanish flu, with its effects, its impacts, and because, let's face it, healthcare and medical field wasn't as what we see it as today, okay, the advancements in science it was 10 times worse, right? It was 10 times worse. But again, I'm not saying that the coronavirus is not impactful or significant or, up there with the Spanish flu. I'm just saying because of lack of science, lack of healthcare, guidelines, restrictions, help, and help, I guess you could say strategies in a way. There's no way to battle this flu. Okay, not many people knew exactly what was happening, and because the Espionage Sedition Acts that were signed by Woodrow Wilson during World War I, if anybody tried to explain about this threat, this virus in America, they reviewed that they're going against the United States. So, although some people knew the effects of this virus and knew the effects of this illness, they were restricted of what they could say because it was going against the United States, and how that was an issue, right? And how that was maybe going against the war effort. So if you talked about this virus, this flu, and how impactful it was, you could be thrown in jail, right? Because it's going against the war effort. And that was very challenging for many Americans. And with the Spanish flu, like I said, many people in that time had no idea what a virus was. Their only way of combating against it was maybe just letting people bleed out. Right. So they cut someone, oh yeah, you'll bleed it out. The blood, the blood flow that's coming out of your body will relieve you of this virus. That doesn't work. Come on now. Whiskey. So they get just hammered drunk and alleviate the effects of this virus. And in many cases on the battlefield too, um, because this obviously was all these countries coming together all throughout the world in one central location in Europe. That's kind of how this virus spread and really caused damages all throughout the world because these soldiers coming home, they didn't know to wear masks. They didn't know to really have any type of ailments or social distancing, which actually did happen in the 1918 and early 1900s. People did social distance and everything like that and wore masks in many occasions. Um, but with the Spanish flu, some of the ailments that these soldiers would face is that they would become very pale. And there's even reports that many of the doctors on the battlefield had no idea who was a white soldier or even an African American soldier because of how white and how the discolor of their skin would present itself. All right, many people had no idea what race even people were. Okay, because of how the sickness really affected the people. It also caused, because it was a respiratory issue, it caused many people to bleed out their mouths, their nose, and in some cases, people actually bleed from their ears and their eyes. Okay, and any openings that they had in of their body, obviously, the other openings, they would bleed from these certain areas because the effects of this virus, the low blood flow to these areas. Okay, and like I said, it caused more deaths and issues to people than the actual war itself. Okay, and as you know, all these people just jam packed in Europe, battling close to combat in the trenches. Right, we talked about that and how unsanitary and gross it really was. And then after the war, everybody goes back to their locations, goes to their own countries, and this virus spreads rampant. And please check out the video. Okay, it's very important. I think it's very significant how it can relate it to what's going on today with the coronavirus, and I think it's pretty interesting. I think you'll enjoy it. But yeah, there's a lot of comparisons, and obviously some contrasts of the virus of in the Spanish flu compared to what we're facing today with the coronavirus. But I wanted to go over that with you. I thought that was very interesting and fitting in what's going on today in today's world. Remember, we're going to have our test Friday, so I will put out that study guide tomorrow. And then also tomorrow, I want to talk about the Red Scare. That's a big thing I want to discuss and go over with you tomorrow. All right, that's all I have for today. Please check out the video. It's very, very important. I think you'll find it fitting of what's going on in today's world and how we can maybe compare and contrast that. So that's going to be a bell ringer tomorrow. Make sure you check it out. All right, we'll see you guys later. Have a good one.